This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
This half hour being brought to you by the Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports, domestics, micro brews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drink, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and hot every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. And also, now 3 ready-to-drink cocktail mixes. Jack Daniels, High Noon, Crown Royal, and the Pickle Bar, led by my 2 personal favorites, the Barrels and the Dills, are indeed second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. 21 years ago, the St. Joe's basketball team entered the NCAA tournament as a number 1 seed, captured the imagination not just of Philadelphia, but of the nation. Aaron Bracy's written a book about this. Aaron, timing's perfect with the Lapchick Award going to Phil Martelli. Welcome.
Hey, Steve. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on your show today.
It's great to be with you. So for you to chronicle this, give me an idea on the research part of it and the kind of cooperation you got from all the individuals involved.
Well, the research was extensive. I read and dug up every statistic, every article, every press release, anything I could find on that team and that season, because I wanted to be the most prepared I could, not just to tell the story, but for every interview. And each of the research that I found led me to like some kind of interesting angles for my interviews. And then the people were extremely cooperative. I interviewed 90 people. I did more than 100 interviews with 90 people, including every coach of the 2003-04 team. Phil Martelli, I sat down with him for 3 hours in his living room and then called him subsequently several times. So got a lot of insight from the coaches and the players. The only players that I was not able to talk to, there was a reserve player named Arvydas Lizius, who no one seems to know where he is. He was from overseas. And Delonte West, who everyone knows who he is. Delonte has had well-chronicled struggles, was in touch with Delonte's family. He knows about the book. I thought we were going to get a chance to talk. The interview just never happened, and ultimately I had to make my deadline. But lots of people talked about Delonte. I talked to his high school coach, obviously all the St. Joe's people. And I got a real mix, Steve, of people to talk to, not just St. Joe's people, but opposing players, opposing coaches, opposing sports writers, fans, support staff. I want to get as many perspectives as I could, Steve, to really understand the story and then hopefully be able to tell it in a way that really is going to be interesting for readers.
It's interesting because Jameer Nelson was, out of Chester, one of the terrific players. What did it take for Phil to convince him to stay home when he may not have been the biggest in stature, but still had a lot of people that thought he could play at a big-time level?
Man, I'm getting chills as you ask that question, because that is actually one of the early chapters in the book where I go into great detail about how St. Joe's was able to land Jameer Nelson. Obviously, I would like people to find that out in detail in the book, but I'll give just a brief overview, Steve. Jameer Nelson was he was undersized. He was a 5'11" point guard, and didn't really shoot the ball that great in high school. At the time, point guards didn't really need to shoot it that well, but he wasn't really being recruited by anyone big. The biggest recruiters for him were St. Joe's, Temple, and UMass. And St. Joe's loved him. First time they saw him, Monte Ross was the assistant coach. He was actually there to scout another player from another team. And the Chester coach, Fred Pickett, at the time said, hey, I've got a point guard. He's just a sophomore. I think he's pretty good. Could you take a look at him? And that was the first time anyone ever recruited Jameer Nelson. Jameer scored maybe 2 points in that game. I don't know exactly how many. He didn't score very many points, if any. But Monte Ross fell in love with the way Jameer played, the way he led the team, the way he played defense. And then Temple and UMass were the other two main suitors. And there were some challenges with each of them, and I'd like to send readers to the book. But suffice to say, St. Joe's did not have it easy to win over Jameer Nelson. Now, I will also say, Steve, that when it came to Jameer's, as he became better in high school, his junior year, he started going to all these camps. And by then, people were like, wow, this Jameer guy can really play. Like, he was not only holding his own with some of the best point guards in the country, but he was out-competing them. By then, some of the high major schools started to give him some looks, but it kind of had been too late in the ballgame. St. Joe's had been with him from the beginning, and in the book I kind of explained how St. Joe's was able to out-recruit Temple and UMass. But it's really an interesting story, and also I think an inspiring story for people. Like, I think sometimes when someone takes a look at someone and they immediately judge them based on like something like their height or the way they look, whether it's sports or anything else, like you can't always measure someone by something so simple. And Jameer proved he went on to be one of the best players in college. He had a 14-year NBA career, and I'm sure a lot of those high major schools that looked at him for just his height, certainly regretted that over time. But I think it just shows, again, somebody is not always – there's more than just what you see to somebody.
What's interesting is that people may not realize that St. Joe's was in the NCAA tournament the year before. I think they lost in the opening round in a close game to Auburn, if I recall correctly. And
that's correct. They lost in overtime. Really close game.
Yeah, but they opened the season for 304 at Madison Square Garden against Gonzaga. What did that win do to reinforce the confidence of everybody?
That was huge. Gonzaga they were highly ranked. I think they were ranked 12th in the country at the time, and they were a program that had success, obviously at sort of the quote-unquote mid-major level, but certainly were considered a team that was a national program. And those two schools had two great games in the previous two seasons. I write about it a little bit in the book, but I think the two games had been decided by all 4 points, both games coming down to the final possession. So this was the rubber match. They had each won one of them on the other's home court, and it was a highly anticipated matchup, and it really was going to set the barometer for what St. Joe's could be. And they came out, and they played a fabulous game. Jameer was amazing. Delonte West played a great game. Pat Carroll, Tyrone Barley, the defensive wizard as a junior who worked all offseason on his shot. I think he hit 4 3-pointers in that game. And I think that was the start of, like, hey, this could be something special. In fact, in the book, Dick Girardi, the longtime Daily News writer who does Penn State radio, I know you guys up there know Dick Girardi, called Phil Martelli the day after the Gonzaga game and said, Phil, I don't know if you're going to lose another game this season.
Yeah, that's DJ. He's my broadcast partner, so yes, I know him extremely well. In fact, we'll be working the Maryland game tomorrow, as a matter of fact. So they go through this, and I don't think people realize that in the history of Division I basketball, there have only been 25 teams that have had an undefeated regular season, and St. Joe's is one of them. And I think after St. Joe's, the next one after that was Wichita State in 2014. So this is a remarkable run for them. But after they lose to Xavier, people wondered whether they'd be a 1 seed. Well, they end up being a 1 seed, and then comes the Billy Packer moment. Now, you and I both know he's just somebody delivering his opinion. He's not in the room voting. But it sure didn't exactly put Phil in a good mood, did it?
It sure didn't. And, Steve, you're right. And the last undefeated team before St. Joe's, I think, was UNLV in 1991, 92, I believe, or maybe 1991. But it had been a while. But yeah, they lost that game to Xavier, and they got blown out in that game. I mean, it was just a no contest, which was sort of the most surprising thing. And then you get to Selection Sunday, and there were a lot of detractors saying they shouldn't be a 1 seed. They do get the 1 seed, and then Billy Packer goes. He's on CBS, and he says, St. Joe's shouldn't be a 1 seed. And the thing that really irked Phil Martelli wasn't so much that he was kind of critical of St. Joe's, although that did irk him. But Billy Packer rattled off 9 other schools that he thought was more worthy of a number 1 seed than St. Joe's. And so Phil famously said that Packer could kiss my you-know-what. I know this is a family radio program. And, and it really kind of added to the whole intrigue. St. Joe's had been a huge story that season anyway. Jameer was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. But that Billy Packer moment, just amped it up another notch. And then the irony of all ironies, Steve, was that St. Joe's, they go up to Buffalo, they beat Liberty, they beat Bob Knight and Texas Tech in the first and second round of the NCAA tournament. And who do they get in the Sweet 16? They get Wake Forest, Billy Packer's alma mater. And who is the color analyst for the game? Billy Packer.
Yep. Incredible. That? Yep. And St. Joe's won the game by, I think, 3 or 4 in that game to advance to the Sweet 16.
Chris Paul was on that Wake Forest team. I talked to Chris Paul for the book. He had some really cool comments in the book. And then they play Oklahoma State. Sorry, I know you're going to ask something else.
Well, no. I was going to say, I want to follow up on that. What did Chris Paul say about facing Jameer Nelson? Because you're talking about Major League college point guard against Major League college point guard.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And this I will give away. He says a little bit more in the book, Steve. One of the really, really interesting things that I found from Chris Paul is not only did he appreciate the opportunity to play against Jameer Nelson and Delonte West, who they knew all about, obviously, Wake Forest, everyone did. And Chris Paul and Jameer would later become competitors and friends in the NBA. But Chris Paul told me that he actually modeled parts of his game from watching Jameer when Chris Paul was a senior in high school, which would have been Jameer's junior year at St. Joseph's. And so I just thought it was really cool and interesting that Chris Paul took some of Jameer Nelson's game and put it into his game. And Chris Paul is one of the 2 or 3 best point guards in NBA history. So it was kind of cool. And Chris Paul talked a little bit more about what that game meant to him. And people can read about that in the book. But it was really cool to get his perspective. Obviously, one of the greatest players in NBA history, and to have him in the book was a real thrill for the author, anyway.
Obviously, yeah, of course it was. You have Jameer Nelson, Delonte West, guy like Pat Carroll. When you talk to the players, and sometimes you'll get a different perspective from the coaches involved. Which guy on this team was quietly a glue guy and delivered consistently good performances but wasn't a star?
I'm going to give you someone that no one would know. And this guy was a walk-on. So his name is Robert Hartshorn. He was a cheerleader. He was a St. Joseph's cheerleader. And funny story, Phil Martelli saw him dunking at halftime while he was cheerleading. He dunked the ball at the Palestra. And he's like, that guy, this is Robert Hartshorn said, Phil saw me dunk and he wanted me to come out for the team. So anyway, he comes out, he makes the team as a walk-on. He was a practice player. And Robert Hartshorn's role for the team, as people are going to read, is he drove the level of intensity up in practice. And I really call out the part about practice and what St. Joe's was able to do and how it led to their success. But he was a consistent performer in practice, a very completely unheralded. No one probably ever knew he was on the team. But he really contributed to their success. Also was positive reinforcement throughout. But it's really they were all glue guys, Steve. It's weird because that's part of what made this team great. You know when you think hey, who's the glue guy? Jameer Nelson was the star of the team, but he was the glue guy. There was one, after one subpar practice, he took the huddle after the practice and said, he said, we're all trying out for spots here, even me. And that was the attitude they had. No one, he was the leader of that team, but he led by example and words. But if your best player is saying, I'm taking every practice, I need to make the team, every player kind of fell in line. And I felt like they were all glue guys, but Robert Hartshorn is a really interesting story. I think people are going to really enjoy learning more about him and their practices in the book.
there's a certain intensity to playing any game. There's a certain intensity to play a Gonzaga. There's a lot of intensity to play a conference game. But when you're in the Big Five, you have to play everybody else, which brings with it an intensity. What did those Big Five games do to have iron sharpen iron so that when they got to the NCAA tournament, it was like, well, we've done this before?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, in fact, a lot of the success for St. Joseph, as people can find in the book, really can be attributed to the Big Five and competing against the likes of Fran Dumpy, who was having a ton of success at Penn at the time. Jay Wright was just starting out at Villanova, and especially John Chaney at Temple.
Yeah.
Phil Martelli started his coaching career. He lost to John Chaney his first 10 games, and he obsessed with figuring out how to solve the matchup zone and how to beat John Chaney. He crafted much of his recruiting and much of his style of play around how to beat Temple. And he figured if I could beat Temple, I'm going to be good in the Big Five. And Temple at the time was in the Atlantic 10. I'm going to be good in the Atlantic 10. So, hey, that's a good place to start. I need to figure out a way to beat Temple. And I really laid it out in the book, getting not only huge cooperation from Phil Martelli, but Dan Leibovitz, who was an assistant coach under John Chaney, was an amazing resource for the book, explained in detail the matchup zone, explained in detail how St. Joseph's was able to take advantage of it, and Phil Martelli did as well. And I think that's a really interesting read, especially for basketball guys like you and me, Steve. The book itself is a basketball book, but I feel like it's much bigger than basketball, and I tried not to make it too deep into basketball, if that makes any sense. I wanted it to be like anyone could enjoy it. In fact, the copy editor from the publisher said she dreaded the assignment because she hates sports, but read my book and loved it. So that was a great compliment. But in this case, Steve, basketball people are going to love learning about St. Joe's versus Temple and matchup zone. At least I did as a basketball fan.
Yeah, because you talk about Dick Girardi. Later on in life, Dick had to craft, what did he call it, the beer summit, where John and Phil had to sit down after a spat, and Dick kind of brokered it. So they needed to break the ice.
Yeah, they did. That was after Goongate. And if I could mention Dick Girardi, since I know people listening know Dick, and I know you know him well. Dick was an amazing resource for the book. Both reading his articles in the Daily News and interviewing for the book, he had so many wonderful things to say. And it's weird. He had like a prescient feel for St. Joe's that season. Like all along, he had his finger right on the pulse of what was going to happen, including their loss to Xavier. And highly encourage people to check out the book and read Dick's comments. And couldn't be more thankful for him contributing to the book in the ways that he did. And also, it was just a thrill to go back and read all his stories. He's such a great writer and in a really kind of unique and colorful way. And I just wanted to shout him out since I know a lot of people know him on this radio station.
I appreciate that. I have to ask about the assistants. How much contact did you have with Matt Brady, Mark Bass, Monte Ross, those guys? Because sometimes assistants can give you some great feel.
No doubt. I talked in depth to all three. They were all amazing resources for the book. Matt Brady was the shooting guru for St. Joe's, and he explained in detail how he transformed Delonte West from a freshman. Delonte West took 15 three-point attempts, Steve, and missed 13 of them. And he transformed into a above average, if not great, three-point shooter. Obviously, Pat Carroll was always a good three-point shooter. He didn't need so much help from Matt Brady, but what Pat Carroll did need help was from Mark Bass. Mark Bass, who was an assistant coach at St. Joe's and was their all-time leading three-point shooter until Pat Carroll broke his record, Mark Bass taught Pat Carroll how to get free to get your shot off. And Monte Ross did so many things for St. Joe's and really was the first coach on the staff to recruit Jameer Nelson, develop the relationship with Jameer Nelson, as the whole staff did, but did so much. So the coaches gave so much valuable insight into what made that team great, and really thankful for their time and all the players. The players were they were like an open book telling me things about the team, and it was just a real pleasure and a real treat for me to learn about the team, and then to be able to tell the story was just a thrill.
And by the way, Pat Carroll's dad, John, played football here at Penn State. So
I didn't know that, but I knew he was a Western PA guy because I know Pat was also looking at Duquesne. Decided on St. Joe's in large part because of Jameer.
So one more time, where can people find this great work?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. The book is called A Soaring Season, the incredible, inspiring story of the 2003-04 St. Joseph's Hawks. It's available everywhere beginning. The publication date is March 1st, which is tomorrow, one day away. Super excited. You should be able to walk into your local bookstore. If they don't have it tomorrow, it'll be there soon. You can also order it now on Amazon, on my website, big5hoops.com, and the publisher is Brookline Books. All three of those places have the book available. So I'd like to say beginning tomorrow, wherever books are sold, which is thrilling.
Yeah, that is thrilling. Thanks so much for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Aaron.
Thank you, Steve. If I could also just say,
sure.
Zach Hicks is a former student of mine, and I'm really proud of him. And you guys have a great one up there at Penn State and Zach Hicks. So shout out to Zach Hicks. Great player and better person.
Yeah, I think the world of Zach. I really do. He is just one of the nicest kids, and, man, he has a good shot. All right. So
you can shoot it. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron Bracy. All right, half hour brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is because it's Brewers Outlet time. The beverage supermarket has the area's largest beer selection, imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you and thank you for your years of patronage.